Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I think there goes the audio, so I don't have to talk as loud. We'll give folks just another few seconds to come in, so we will be starting just a minute or two late, but we'll ensure that there's enough time for the session. Okay, perfect. Well, go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karin Marquez. I'm the Chief Public Safety Brand Officer for a company called RapidSOS. You may notice that my accent is not from this side of the world. I'm from the United States, a state called Colorado. Really honored to be here amongst all of you today to share a little story about RapidSOS and the work that we do, and really the critical nature of data. So before I came to work for this company, I spent 21 years in the 911 center, the emergency center. So I started as a call taker, dispatcher. I worked in records, but always working with answering that call and dispatching police, fire, and EMS, along with our emergency management groups as well. So my background does come from an operational seat and really trying to understand now how this data can be utilized within the operations center, the control center, as well as out in the field as well to impact response. On the other side of things, I also sit on the NEENA board, so I represent the private sector on NEENA, so I'm honored to be voted in to represent as well and have some NEENA folks here, so thank you for being in the room also. Today we're going to talk about what data do you need to see. So I really enjoyed the opening session this morning, learning about the response to the Turkish earthquake, but also from the EENA staff about the transition to supporting emergency calls for service and in what methods and mechanism are people reaching out to get help these days, because it's not traditionally from a phone call anymore. We're moving into an environment where people want to call from different methods, whether it's an app or a connected device. So we're going to break down what connected devices really are. But in everything that we do, and you may have heard some other motivational speakers talk about starting with your why. Why do we do what we do? It's because we have a community members that need help. They want quick access to emergency services, whatever means or mechanism that they have. We know that our world is also changing. Climate change was talked about this morning also. We see an increase in these incidents and events that happen all across the globe. It's just getting worse. So what are the lessons that we can learn about how technologies and how data can be utilized in emergency response to help better support and serve our communities in their greatest time of need? Obviously, there's an infrastructure piece that plays into that, and it's critical that those things are working. But what other tools and what other data can we learn to make these situations and the response to them even better? We know that we have more medical emergencies that occur across the globe. When people call for help, they now are aware of an emergency service number around the world, whether it's 112, 999, some other number. And so in that time of need, they are going to make that phone call, but they may not always be able to speak and to tell you what is happening. What kind of information could be available to improve their request for service, their phone call for help? Maybe they don't speak the language, or perhaps during that emergency call, they pass out and you don't have any information. What tools can be utilized to support and improve that emergency request for service? We also have an aging population. So I am one of those that's in what's called the sandwich population, where I'm raising children, but I'm also a caretaker for aging parents. There are technologies through the entire life cycle, from the time a child is born and even in utero, that can, monitor what is happening inside while that baby is growing. When the baby is born, there are things that you can put on that child to sense whether the child is breathing. Can data be utilized when that child stops breathing to help notify parents, caretakers, loved ones, and that data be transmitted to emergency service? And so if we start to think about all of the other connected things in our world, we think about cradle to the save or to the grave even. In every stage and phase of life, there is some connected thing that can help improve the way that emergency response can respond to your request for service because that data was available on something, somewhere, in your vehicle, bicycle, whatever, it doesn't matter. And then, of course, there's an increase in violent crime. Now, there may be some regional areas where it's rather safe, but if you watch any of the news around the globe, you see that there is an increase in violent crime. And how can data be utilized to improve our response to violent crime? We also know that there's an increasing number of connected devices. So if you look back in time a little bit, IoT connected devices in 2019, we were looking at 8.6 billion, expected to be 29.4 billion by 2030, which is not far away. So we are really right now in a critical time to understand the value of that data, how to create the operational efficiencies, how to ingest the data and use that data now because it's not going away, it's just going to grow. So in this learning phase, we have really learned and understood how that data can be utilized for different workflows and how it is beneficial and really incredibly valuable to the field responders as well. But when we go back to that why, it's all because someone was in need. And that community member that bought that wearable device or that purchased that connected vehicle, purchased that phone that has life-saving technologies and opted in to provide that during their emergency call, it's because of them that we do what we do, right? So even in your everyday, but as we accept new data, we want to do that because there's a consumer at the end of that line that needs our help and our support. So talk a little bit about the impact of situational awareness. When we talk about having situational awareness, that could take many shapes. One, it could be, how do we visualize a request for service? Number one, we can plot a pin on a map. We can add contextual information. That was another term used this morning. What kind of contextual information may be available to help improve that service? Number one, latitude, longitude. Great, we need to know the location in order to send resources. But visually, mapping that latitude, longitude makes a lot more sense. So here's a little bit of situational awareness. And then we start layering on different tools. What is calling? Is it a phone? Is it an Apple device, a Google device, a different type of a device? Is it a car? Is it, a person, maybe they don't speak English. Is there language information that's available with this emergency request for service that can help me understand if I need translation services to be introduced, if I need maybe another interpreter service like ASL or something else, but that really can help us speed up the call processing time. We're asking a series of questions. What is the location? What is the emergency? Who is involved? Are there weapons detected? What is the other situational information that we need to respond to this incident or event? The more data that we have that comes in can help us verify visually all of this information that we're asking, improve that call process time, which can result in faster dispatch. We are all trying to ensure that our field responders can get to the scene much faster, but you also want to be informed, right? You want to know what you're actually going to, and you rely a lot on radio dispatch to get that information. So how can that telecommunicator and the data that sits behind that emergency request drive that response? Also ensuring that you're sending the right resources at the right time. You may have a standard ambulance response for a medical call. Maybe it's a medic unit and a fire truck. But if you know that there's more people involved, that maybe there are hazards on scene, some sensors that are telling you that it's a hazmat situation, you're able to drive different decisions out of that, right? And you're able to send different resources as well. So you improve the outcome for the persons that are having these emergencies and maybe people that are even around. We also want to improve that mortality rate. So because data could be available and utilized within that emergency request for service, it can drive that faster dispatch. You also can see a reduction in the mortality rate, meaning that we are saving more lives. The FCC used to say that tens of thousands of lives are lost because information is not available, right? So that location and contextual information is going to help save lives. It does need to be utilized and looked at. And then a 20% reduction in fire damage. So fire responders in the room, raise your hand. All right. So do you believe that if additional data were available, or if you could see the situation as you're responding, you can change that response and improve safety of that facility, building, home, right? Even knowing if there's children in the house, where those children may live, if they're in a basement, if there are weapons in the house or in the residence, what other information can we gather from a structure to help us respond to that emergency more effectively and ensure that we have the right number of units as well to improve the response? So there's a great opportunity, and that is sending relevant information to those emergency requests for service. Okay, raise of hand if you are wearing a smart device on your person. Okay, nearly everyone has a wearable device, and I bet every single person in this room has a smartphone. Yes? Anybody that does not? Okay, so number one, from your mobile device, when you call emergency services, you can have location information on that device that can create that faster, more efficient response if we have the device location. Secondarily, you've got your personal wearable device. Well, what if you fall out? What if you pass out? And there's technology within that wearable device that can indicate that you need help. Well, it can create that emergency call for you, but now what? We need the contextual information to tell emergency dispatchers who you are and what you may be experiencing. So on a lot of our devices or through an app, there's the ability to opt in. When 112, 911, 911, or 999 is dialed, share my information with emergency services. What kind of information might be relevant? Maybe who's calling, medical conditions, what allergies I might have, who my emergency contact is. Maybe if it's somebody that has behavioral health or mental health crisis challenge diagnosis, that information can be useful in that response, can it not? Right? And so we're looking now at what other information can tell emergency services and responders about a person that's requesting this help. Well, what about for field responders in the room? When you get to a scene in a situation, if you knew that there were de-escalation techniques that you could have access to before you went and talked to a person, that would be really helpful. And that can dramatically change the outcome of a situation that's experiencing crisis. It could also dramatically change the outcome when you come into contact with a person that, maybe does have an allergy to certain medications or even latex gloves if they're used out in the field. Knowing that information, now we're understanding what data is and how that can create situational awareness to drive a more informed response. Connected mobility. I noticed that coming in, there are a lot of really nice cars in Europe, and there are a lot of smart technologies within those vehicles. And we're really learning that a vehicle can tell a lot about a crash before someone calls to report it. So when a crash occurs, typically we would wait for somebody to call emergency services, and we ask a series of questions. And if you're in a very populated area, chances are you don't get one call. How many do you get? Too many, right? And you're trying to understand what direction of travel people are calling from. But the car can tell you exactly what happened, where it is, what kind of car it is, color, make, model, license plate, VIN, all of that information, which may not necessarily be relevant for the dispatcher at the time, but may be relevant when the field units get on scene. But what if that car can also speak for you because it's a single vehicle accident, there's nobody else on the road, nobody else can call for you, but that car can send that emergency request for service in. It might go through a third-party service provider, it might go direct, but now that car says, hey, there was airbag deployment. The impact was on the front driver's side. Oh, the vehicle rolled over and there's fluids leaking. Does that change our response? Significantly, right? There are times that maybe people would not have been saved, rescued, or had units sent because no one was aware of that vehicle that crashed. Perhaps that vehicle rolled down an embankment, it's in the water now, and no one can call on their behalf. But now your connected vehicle too can save your life. Situational awareness that drives that informed response and helps to save people. We talked about smartphones already. We talked about a few different apps. But let's talk about gig economy workers. You have rideshare workers. In certain places, there are folks that are picking up groceries and delivering them to your home. I'm a consumer of that technology. But there are also things like food delivery services or just folks that are in fleet vehicles that may be out in remote areas. When they experience an emergency, they may have an app on their device that can either do one of two things. I'm having an emergency, I hit a button, and it can connect me to 911 and provide additional information about who I am, what kind of vehicle I'm in, whatever that data may be from the app itself. But what if I'm just not safe? I may not need emergency services yet. I may just be having a sense of I want to talk to somebody while I'm doing this job, but I think that it could potentially escalate. What do we do then? And that's where you could introduce a third-party service provider, like a monitoring company, who can stay on the phone with this person. Not 112, 911 is not needed yet. And if the situation does not escalate, that call's handled, 112 never sees it. But if a situation does escalate, you have the ability for that third-party service provider to have that call routed to the appropriate emergency service center and have that information about who's involved, what's happening, what kind of car are they in, where were they going, what were they doing. All of those questions that can be answered immediately to improve that call processing time. From rideshare, there's companies like Uber, Lyft, and others. Uber specifically, when an emergency occurs, the rider or the driver has the ability to poke a panic button that connects them to 911, or they can send a text to 911, providing the vehicle information, color, make, model, year. Most of those folks that are in a rideshare, whether you're in this part of Europe, that part of Europe, in Spain, Mexico, wherever in the world you are, I may not know where I am. I may not be able to pronounce the street names, but I also may not necessarily know what kind of vehicle I just got into because I'm going to be heads down in my smartphone. So when an emergency occurs, all of that information provided to the telecommunicator also helps that person that's in need, because when they're in their panic state, a lot of people don't think clearly or don't talk clearly. And then we go another layer, connected buildings. Floor plans, would we say, are very important in emergency response? Indoor information, Z-access for multi-floor buildings. But what about things like weapon detection and other types of technologies that are within that connected building? Whether it's a panic button or another tool, those connected building systems can also send that information not only to 112, but also out to the field to improve that response, creating greater situational awareness. So I'm layering on from location to additional data, how that information can improve response in all of the different places that we are in our world. And then we have our homes. Does anyone have a connected home? So a smart home, different technologies and tools that can alarm you if someone comes, motion detection. Okay, so a few. People want to have a sense of safety and security when they're in their home, especially when they lay their head to rest. And they want to be notified if someone breaks into that house, if there's motion, if there's a water leak. That's kind of important as well because that can really save me money on the construction that may be needed. So from that connected home, you can have different triggers that notify emergency services and emergency response. And now you understand the context of the house and who is in the house as well. So all of these are different ways that information can come through an emergency or intelligent data platform. And then we need to make sure it gets out to someone, right? And so that's the work that we do at RapidSOS, is ensuring the data is available for the emergency telecommunicator. But as well, we want to get that information out to the field responder so that they can use the information, the data, to inform their response as well, not relying on radio or other means and mechanisms of communication. Potential to get this information to the health system, right? So if we have a medical situation, understanding what happened and what triggered this emergency request for service and getting that into the health system so that they can understand situationally what happened to this patient, how were they cared for all the way through. Really important information. And then emergency contacts as well. Your emergency contact can help support you to ensure that, number one, they're able to be reunited with their loved one should an emergency occur, but they may also have additional contextual information for you, and so that emergency contact information can be important as well. So how do we empower control rooms and folks to see the information when we've determined that this is data that you need to see and would be useful? Bless you. So we have a couple of different mechanisms. One is to integrate into already existing systems within your control room. There's a call handling system that you receive your phone calls on, and typically there's some information there, maybe a mapping system. You may have a CAD system as well, where you're entering the call for service and you're dispatching those units. There may be other third-party mapping providers and other tools that are used out in the field. There are APIs to ensure that that data can be delivered to the right person at the right time to improve that request for service or that response. And then we also have a secure web browser called RapidSOS Portal. And the user interface here is a little bit more manageable because we own it. So here what you're seeing on the screen over on the left-hand side is when an emergency call comes in, it displays in that 911 queue or 112 queue here. And then when you click on that button, you're able to see a couple of different things. Number one is the map pin for the location. When you get information from a carrier, if you want updated mobile location, typically you're clicking a button to request information to come back and be updated. That request can take 20, 30, 45 seconds, right? So by the time you're getting information, that location may be old. Being able to receive it directly from the handset, then we can show you if a party is moving, walking, running, they are in a vehicle. You can see that direction of travel. Now, as this person is telling you what's happening or you're doing your caller interrogation, you can actually see if the person has not told you that they've moved, because our callers don't always tell us the full story, right? And so here you're using the visualization to help support in that request for service. And then other additional information that may be available, health profile information. What's important is that the information can be seen in a screen that has all of that data in one place. There was a staffing challenge mentioned this morning in the EENA presentation. We experience that kind of all around the globe. We don't want our telecommunicators to have to go into multiple systems to pull different data out of, right? So we want to ensure that, number one, it's presented in the most easy to read fashion, that the most critical data is presented first, location, and then other information subsequently behind that. And we can work on prioritizing what that looks like. But then also you want all of the tools to be accessed in a single platform as best as possible. And so the work that we do, there's two sides of the platform. One is making sure that that data is visualized and sent to emergency services. On the other side, we work with those companies that want to send life-saving data to emergency services to ensure that they don't need a million connections into your systems. They send it through one platform. So when that request for service comes in, you may have a crash plus detection from a wearable device and other contextual information. So it can be that data is also layered to help increase awareness on what that situation is as well. So here we talk about key data sources, from smartphone security systems, whether it's a do-it-yourself system or from another company, personal emergency response systems, medical emergency response systems or PERS devices, and vehicle telematics as well. There's so much more data also. These are just kind of the verticals that we try to highlight to create that picture. And I can tell you that this information has been utilized to save countless lives. We receive impact stories all the time on how a telecommunicator used the information to drive a more informed response. So you'll see here it's kind of playing this accurate dynamic location with medical profile information. And I think especially here in this country, it's really important to understand that this information is shared when a person opts in to share it. So they do have to fill out a little form and toggle it on and say, I click to understand that when 112 is called, now I'm sharing my data. And when you talk about creating operational excellence within the 9112 center, sorry, I'm going to say 911 a lot, within the emergency service center, you also want to make sure that you have policies, that you provide training, that you provide that awareness also to your community on how do you reach emergency services and what tools do you have on your person? What are you carrying in your pocket or your purse? What may you have in your vehicle? So that public education and awareness piece is really important as well to work with your communities. So here we have accurate real-time location, location history, medical profile, people have to opt in. But as I was mentioning, that indoor building information, it's great to get to the facility. Now we have multi-stories and we don't know where our callers are. So in that multi-story situation with indoor mapping, you're able to actually see that Z location or Z axis information. So you can contextualize that into, there's an uncertainty level. So we're 60% certain that the location or that the floor is this. And we do that in partnership with a company, actually one sitting in the room, called Geocom. So you'll see here how they're showing that Z-axis information with the sphere. So we have a level of certainty that the person's on a specific floor. We may not always go to the right floor, so it's a starting point. And even if you think about location, it is a starting point for your search area, which is your radius. So you go there first. It may not always be the door to kick down. Does that part make sense? Okay. Location, alarm information, and multimedia clips. So here we're going back into the DIY security system. You also have the ability to share video. I think especially here, there's probably better adoption to video than there is where I come from. We're still a little bit challenged and hesitant on looking at video, but I look at different parts of the world where our emergency centers are receiving and accessing video daily and making use of that. So when that alarm goes off, that sensor is detected, you have the ability to see what that video is of the situation. It could also create snippets if needed. But I think AI does play a big piece into this where maybe that telecommunicator doesn't need to see what the video is, but giving them some sort of information around what the situation is so they don't have to analyze video while they're trying to take in all these calls for service. So location data, alarm data, sensor information, building entry instructions, etc. And then I've already covered the vehicle data from rideshare apps. So we're going to go, how do you operationalize this in the center? So number one, awareness. I think that is a critical piece, but awareness also for your telecommunicators and having standardized training. There's a lot of data out there and a lot of information that I've already given you in this short period of time. So we also provide training and access to all of this information as soon as new data providers are rolled out. So every telecommunicator that is working has 24/7 access within that web browser RapidSOS portal to training information. But do we all train the same way? Do we all learn the same way? Probably not. Some folks like to read on their own and study. Some folks may want it in a short snippet video. And other mechanisms, maybe I want the full user guide because I need to read end to end how all of this works. So we ensure that you have access in different means and mechanisms so that your telecommunicators can learn in the best way that they learn. And then also there's a testing period, right? You need to make sure that the telecommunicators understand when and how to use the data. And also create a win for them, create an impact story for them. So when they use that data, somehow getting feedback from the caller or from the field responders that because that data was available and it was given to me on this call, we were able to do X, Y, or Z. We were able to save a life. We responded 5 minutes faster. The burning didn't build down and we were able to evacuate a number of people from that facility. We were able to respond to a person that we probably wouldn't have even responded to that call because we knew that they had fallen, that there was medical information available. So creating that impact story will also help drive that operational excellence internally because your telecommunicators want to be part of the solution. We are all one team. It's one mission. Every one of you that's responding by answering the phone, dispatching on the radio, responding to a request for service, and even those that are providing tools and technologies, we're all in this also to connect to that why, and that's to help save a life and help somebody in need. Ensure that you have standard operating procedures. Critical piece to make sure you have an SOP that tells them not only why to do it, but how. And if they don't, what happens then? And making sure that there's a consistent format that the information is added into CAD so that you can track that also for post-call and post-incident event reconstruction. Quality assurance is also very important because that follows and drives our SOPs and our training, ensuring that you're listening to those calls, you're looking at the data that was available, and ensuring that your telecommunicators were using the information. And if they were not, here's a way we can coach them to show them how by using specific pieces of data could have improved that request for service. And when that happens, that telecommunicator can also go home and say, I know I did a great job today because I made an impact on this call. I saved somebody's life. Many times as a telecommunicator, you may not know that you did something really good because you don't get that feedback. So ensuring that the feedback goes to the telecommunicator, that they use this data, it worked well, here's the impact it made, and that drives them to want to do more actively. So that feedback goes into also, why do these tech companies create life-saving data? Because they want to know that that tool also did its job. So feedback is also important, not only for us to receive, but also for those partners to receive. Did that information get used on an incident they saw on the news? And if so, what did it drive? Are we doing our job, or is there something that we can do better? So we now start to create a private-public partnership between these data providers and these companies and emergency services. They don't know the world that you live in, yet they're providing technologies that you're expected to use. So let's have RapidSOS be in the middle to help introduce you to each other so that they can get feedback directly from you and understand how they can do better. How can we do better? How can we ensure that that data is relevant, that it's timely? So we're creating a lot better partnerships also when we utilize data and we receive that feedback, not only from the telecommunicator, but feedback also to these companies. Okay, so I might have talked a little bit fast, but you might not be too upset because I'm standing in the way of lunch. So before I go into Q&A, I will make a brief announcement that coming up at 2 p.m. or 1400 hours in Gallis Hall, we have a session called Combining Different Technologies to Alert the Population, Public Warning Implementation in France. In Courchevel Hall, we have Defining Call Takers Question Tree session. And then in this hall, we'll have a session on cloud-based CADs and next generation emergency communications industry session. And with that, before we go into lunch, does anyone have any questions? All right, most of you all stayed awake, so this is good. No, I'm kidding. And any questions at all from anyone or thoughts? Is this relevant for what you're, yes?
I actually have a question. Thank you very much for your presentation. I wonder what all these data becomes after.
What it becomes after?
Yes. What do you do with the data? Do you keep it? Do you have a policy? Yes.
So legislatively, we can't keep the data. So it is secure that data is only available during the emergency request for service and maybe up to 10 minutes after that call has been received. Because, people are also concerned about security and privacy. Telecommunicator cannot go back into a system and query information after that event, after that disconnect. And so there are periods of time for exigent circumstances where if needed for exigent circumstances, we can pull it only up to 12 hours. It's gone. We have no more data. Yes. Okay, anyone else? Yes.
I heard this presentation before, and there was a slide that gave an example of the query that would go back and forth between the telecommunicator and the person in distress. Do you have an example of that, or releasing the location information?
Of when the location information goes away, essentially?
No,
Or
asking the person, to provide their location.
So in a normal call interrogation, it's, what is the location of your emergency? And there's a series of questions that may have to be answered or filtered down. We do now have agencies that are using this location information to verify and to do in the QA process, it's a verification, whether it's visual or verbal. And so they're using that information to say, confirming you're at 123 Main Street, but that may be the second question because they want to hear what the caller says first. If that matches the picture I see and the information I see, now I'm going to verify that. I may have to ask an additional question before I use that as verification. And then we also know the caller's not always at the scene of the emergency. But if the caller can't tell you what's happening, at least it's a starting point to get a responder to that request for service and then kind of triage beyond that. Did that answer your question? Okay, great. Yes?
When you made your API with all of that information, did you do any research into how to avoid information overload?
So that's a great question. I think now we see that there is a lot of data available, and we are starting to hear, well, what about overload? So there is work that the product team kind of has on the roadmap, but we understand that we have to aggregate that data better. So at what point in time does who need to see it? But it also is kind of chicken and the egg, right? We got to get the information out first into the field, and then we refine that information as we move forward. Great question. Thank you. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
What do you have to help someone describe a location that isn't where they're at?
So if it's not where they're at, there's actually the demo station in the hall upstairs. If you come into the center, you always want to start, what is the caller describing to you? So on that map view, you can kind of click around and see satellite imagery, street view. You can see where that call map pinned and what information might be around. But if that caller's not at the emergency and other people or sensors are sending information, then you're going to see a lot of different pins pop up on a map that tells you this caller's calling about a crash that they've already passed, but I've got 5 more callers at the scene plus crash data that's indicating that there's an incident and event over here. Now I can validate, were you calling about the crash on this street involving this kind of car? Verify yes, now I can let that caller go and I don't need that location information as much. I'm going to gather for them witness information. What's your phone number? Did you see this happen? We'll have somebody follow up with you. Yes?
You said the data will be, or information will disappear after 24 hours or specific period of time. So what if this data is requested by the court or the legal issue? How can be prepared?
If the data is not available, it cannot be released. So for security purposes, you don't necessarily want to store that information. But depending on legislative policies within different countries, that's where we would need to work with you and really learn and understand what are those requirements and can the data provider actually, provide this, or do they need to adjust that policy at all? So it's not kind of a one size fits all. It's really understanding what country are we working with, what are the legislations, and then from the security standpoint, from the providers, what is possible, what can and cannot be done. All right, anyone else? Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. I do have another session tomorrow, so looking forward to seeing folks again. If you have questions in between now and then, RapidSOS is right upstairs at the entrance. Please enjoy your lunch, and again, thank you so much for having me.